Although although the desire to own a home remains strong among millennials, the challenges to home ownership continue to mount. That's according to a Royal LePage study from 2017. And with more stringent mortgage stress tests now in effect, young potential home buyers could be waiting even longer to enter the market. Our next guest says that there are ways millennials can get into the housing market in spite of all this. However, Sean Cooper is a personal finance expert and author of the book Burn Your Mortgage, and he joins us now with more. Sean, thanks for joining us.
Morning, John.
Let's talk a little bit more about your story, which received national attention because you were just gung-ho to get that mortgage off the books. Tell us about your personal situation.
Sure. So I bought a house at age 27, and I decided to pay off my mortgage as quickly as possible. So I was able to pay it off in only 3 years by living super frugally. And to celebrate, I burned my mortgage papers because, as I mentioned in my book, I see low interest rates as an advantage because if you're super prudent with your finances, you can pay down that mortgage super fast compared to like historic rates of the way like mortgages were.
I mean, your story is unique, got a lot of attention because usually people think about what size mortgage they want to get, and then they talk to the mortgage broker, and then you go down this path. Whereas in your case, and maybe you can tell us, I mean, when you got your mortgage, did it already seem too big for you, and that was why you just aggressively wanted to avoid spending money anywhere else and just pay down the mortgage?
Yeah, like I had a mortgage of $255,000, and you know, by today's standards, that's probably a bit like on the low side. But back then, I thought, you know, that's over $250,000, and my like mother's house was only $200,000 when she bought it, so it was definitely a lot of money. So I just thought, you know, interest rates aren't going to be low forever, so might as well put a plan in place and pay off my mortgage as quickly as possible.
Yeah, sometimes people just don't. The word debt sounds like a different word than mortgage. So people, I don't have any debt, and yet you can have a pretty large mortgage. So, okay, so the beginning of this year, we saw this change in mortgage rules that's going to make a larger part of the Canadian market have a trickier time to hypothetically get the mortgage that they want.
Yes.
Is that the storyline, do you think, for, say, first-time home buyers? Or should they look at that as an opportunity to say, well, maybe you shouldn't be going for such a big mortgage in the first place?
I mean, I think it's definitely prudent, the stress tests that they put in the government, because I don't think people should be stretching themselves to the maximum and assuming that interest rates are going to stay at these like emergency levels forever. So I definitely think that the stress test is good for that reason. And I think that first-time home buyers also have to set themselves realistic expectations. Like they can't expect to be able to afford the same kind of house that their parents grew up in. But you know, for first-time home buyers, it might mean driving until they qualify, or perhaps putting their dreams on hold because, like, under the new stress test, about 20% of their purchasing power is reduced. So you really need to crunch the numbers and get pre-approved with like a mortgage broker or lender under the new rules to see exactly how much you can afford before going out there into the market and actually make an offer on a property.
Let's take one of the words from stress tests, stress. Talk about your own personal stress now that you've done away with the mortgage. Because I know when your story started circulating and people saw it online, for example, there was a healthy debate. Some people saying, Sean is crazy. Low interest rates creates an opportunity to carry that debt. It doesn't mean that you have to live in the basement, avoid spending any money on anything fun in the short term. You can take advantage of that. But how do you physically feel doing away with the mortgage?
Well, I feel great. I mean, the main reason I pay off my mortgage was to not have that stress of 6 figures of debt hanging over my head. I mean, for each individual, you know, they can handle stress in different, like mortgage and debt in different ways. But for me, now that I have my mortgage paid off, I'm able to enjoy financial freedom. So I'm able to travel a lot more. And, you know, if I want to invest in other property, I can do that. Or even I can retire early. It just kind of opens like so many more doors now that I don't have a mortgage anymore, John.
I think because of the rapid rise of home prices in this country, and then the need on the part of municipal governments, the federal government, the Bank of Canada weighing in on this issue, the banking regulators weighing in on this issue, this idea of housing affordability became front and center. In your travels around the country after writing the book, the idea of home ownership young Canadians, the aspiration associated with wanting to buy a home. Have you had a lot of those conversations? People who resonate with what you're saying because they feel like home prices have gone up a lot and it is kind of an unfair environment for first-time home buyers?
Yeah, I mean, I've spoken a lot with a lot of my millennial cohorts, and they just think that the dream of home ownership is out of reach. So the reason that I wrote the book was to show that it is still possible to get into a house. You just have to make some sacrifices in the short term. For example, what I did was I became a landlord and actually lived in the basement of my house and rented up the upstairs. So by being a bit more creative, I was able to pay off my mortgage faster, and there are other options. For example, instead of living in the big city, you could buy a property in like a satellite city like Waterloo or London, Ontario, and actually rent in the big city. And then once you build up that equity, you could eventually buy a property in like a city like Toronto. So there's certainly creative ways to get into the market like that.
This idea of the bank of mom and dad, which was also on your list, how many people do you think tap into that realistically?
Well, I mean, there have definitely been like a number of studies, so I don't have an exact number, but I mean, I think that it's definitely a contributing factor to home prices moving up. But I mean, me personally, I didn't have help with the Bank of Mom and Dad, and to speak to this mortgage stress test under the before January 1st,
right.
You could get your parents to top up your down payment to above 20% and avoid the mortgage stress test. Unfortunately, you can't do that right now, but certainly a bigger down payment helps you because you have a smaller mortgage, and perhaps instead of having to ratchet down your dreams and go to a condo or a townhouse, you might still be able to afford that detached house. Like your parents might be willing to give you some living inheritance so that you can actually afford a property nearby and spend some time together rather than living far out in the suburbs.
Sean, thanks for stopping by.
My pleasure, John.
Sean Cooper's the author of the book, Burn Your Mortgage. Literally did it. And he wrote the book, as you can see right there. Up next, Tara Weber will join us with more on Suncor's big move to acquire more of that Fort Hills project. You're watching Business Day right here on BNN.